Welcome back to Simply Money. Tonight, we're going to be talking about unemployment, interest rates, and recessions. The current economic situation is getting a lot of people nervous. In fact, the Consumer Confidence Index just came out. It is down about 7 points from where it was recently. That's just indicative of how consumers feel about the economy, and that feeling, that confidence, is what drives whether people are going to be investing or not investing, whether they're going to be spending, going on vacations, all sorts of things. Kind of gives your indication of where the economy is at according to people's feelings. And because it is down right now, that just shows that people are very nervous about the economic landscape. There's a lot of chatter about a lot of unknown things. You get this a lot anytime when you have a transfer of leadership, new agendas and all, but there's just a lot more rhetoric, a lot more chaos and division going on, just creating a lot of uncertainty for people. So as we dive into this tonight, we want to look at how economic downturns can impact, jobs and savings, your investments, and making these crucial decisions to prepare financially. Excuse me. So, because about 70% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, um, if people were to lose a job, about half of Americans, if they were to lose a job within 1 month, would have to go into debt, meaning they may be able to still pay bills, but they would be paying bills using debt. They may have to use credit cards, take out loans, whatever the case may be. They would be in a very difficult situation within a month. That's half the people. One third, 33% of people would be in that same situation within a week if they lost their income. And that's staggering, statistics when we look at that and we see how impactful unemployment can be. And then, in one of the most secure sectors out there, the government, that creates that fear, that lack of confidence. So people are beginning to become very nervous about unemployment, and will that trigger a recession? And what's going to happen to my livelihood? What's going to happen to my savings, my investments? All these types of things. That is why the confidence index has dropped and why we're in a situation where we're at today. So our purpose in today's live stream is to better understand, the unemployment, interest rates, and recessions, and how they're connected, and how to protect your finances, how to prepare for these types of things. We've been through, the 2010s, from 2010 right up till about COVID. Uh, Financially, economically, things were pretty smooth. Interest rates were extremely low. There wasn't much chatter about recessions. Every once in a while, you'd have a little blip or something in the system. People would, see a little news or something that would create a little anxiety, but the confidence was rising steadily. Um, and that's something that's very normal in a lot of sense. I don't want to minimize our current landscape economically, what's going on. I know there's a lot of fear. I know it's impacting people. I know people personally that it's impacting directly. So I am not minimizing the impact of this at all. I want to try to keep this economical, on economics, and I want to keep it on finances, and I want to keep it on encouraging you and providing you resources and tools to better prepare yourself financially. I will do my best not to get on political rabbit trails, and keep that for another podcast or another live stream. We'll maybe get on topics like that. But for this topic, we're looking at this impact and what we can do to prepare for it. One thing that people don't understand, maybe don't pay a lot of attention to, is market corrections and bear markets, recessions are a normal part of the cycle. I'm not saying it's good. We don't look forward to it. It's not fun. But a market correction is when the stock market drops 10 to 19% from its recent high. And those happen on a regular basis, almost yearly, if not every other year, sometimes multiple times within a year. But typically, over the course of, since the 1920s, there's been at least three market corrections per decade, sometimes six or seven per decade. So you see the market drop anywhere from 10 to 19% on a very regular basis. And that scares people sometimes. It gets them nervous. They might begin to, jump out of the market. They sell their assets. Those are things that create a little bit of fear, and that confidence, that index begins to drop as people wonder, oh, is this going to be the next recession? Is this a bear market? And then it'll correct and it'll go to new highs. Now, a bear market is when the market corrects itself, or maybe not even corrects itself. It comes down 20 plus percent from its recent high. And those average maybe 1 to 2 times per decade. Since 1920, it's happened at least once a decade. In the 1930s, it happened 5 times. The 70s, it happened 3 times. The 2000s, it happened twice. 2010s it happened once, and the 2020s it's happened once. And so far this decade we've had it one time. And recessions pretty much line up with bear markets. Not necessarily, but pretty much anytime there's a bear market, there's been a recession that goes with that or correlates after that. As people begin to pull money out, they stop spending, they're trying to hoard cash, whatever the case might be. Those kind of correlate to each other with those. But the point is, they're very frequent in the sense of investing. If you're investing for long term, this channel, we don't talk about trading. We're not day traders. We're not, you know, doing covered calls even. We are long-term, slow and steady investors. We're investing in mutual funds, ETFs, index funds, maybe some single stocks, but we're really focused on that long-term minimum, 10 10 years is kind of the minimum we go with. There might be occasions you put some of your investment in for like a 5-year period, but typically we're looking that we're investing it's for 10 years and beyond. So if you're looking at a normal investment for 20, 30 years, that long-term uh, horizon that we're talking about, you're going to likely see at least 3 bear markets and 3 recessions during your investment journey, where you're going to see your stock portfolio drop 20 plus percent. And that's going to happen 3 times over the course of a 30-year career that you're investing on average, maybe more. And over the course of 30 years, you're likely to see, you know, 20, maybe 25 corrections where the market drops 10 to 19%. So you see your portfolio drop 10 or 19% almost on a yearly basis for 30 years. And that causes a lot of anxiety, that keeps people out of the market, that keeps people, fearful from getting into the market and getting that compounding ability that the market offers. But because you understand the frequency of these things, it helps you understand and keeps your mindset to where you're not jumping in and out of the market, because time in the market is the most valuable thing that you have. So we're going to look at a couple things, and let's start with unemployment, because we're hearing a lot about the federal government laying off federal employees left and right, and that's going to have a trickle down effect. You'll see companies downsizing. You could see a lot of cuts being made as a recession hits. People are spending less, so companies are producing less, so they're hiring less and maybe even laying off because their production is down. So recessions and bear markets, those create that unemployment, and that's where they're correlated. You're seeing, the investment and the spending going down, which correlates to people spending less, thus producing less, and unemployment goes up. Currently, as of January, the unemployment rate was 4.1, but we are seeing that going up. There's 230,000 unemployment applications last week alone. We're seeing that ticking up. But just let's look through history at a couple things. During the pandemic, April of 2020, at its high, unemployment reached 14.7%. That was obviously a very unique situation, a lot of panic, a lot of chaos there. The Great Recession of 2008, 2009, unemployment peaked at 10%. in October of 2009. And then you have the Great Depression. We're going to use the Great Depression to compare a lot of these just to see how bad the Great Depression was. Because people who, if you have a grandparent or a parent, depending how old you are, somebody who lived through the Great Depression, sit down with them and talk to them and ask them what life was like. What was not just like how much were groceries, how much, how are people living, but just what was the mentality, what was the feeling, what was the sentiment. Maybe they didn't have the consumer confidence index out so people can compare it and say, oh well, back then we had this level. Ask them what were their friends and their family feeling, what kind of fear was there. Because unemployment in 1933 peaked at 24.9%. Now you got to remember the population was much lower then, but 12.8 million people were unemployed. Imagine that today. Imagine 1 in 4 people being unemployed today. We're concerned. We feel it, it's 4.1. The pandemic for a very short period, it was 14%. Imagine 25%. And that went on for a very long period of time. So even in severe recessions, unemployment has remained well below the Great Depression. And a lot of that is due to the modern economic policies and social safety nets that are there. There's a lot of things that have helped keep people from those situations and our economy from tanking quite as bad. Now, interest rates and inflation, those kind of go hand in hand as well. We talked a lot in the news and in society over the last couple of years about inflation. It really took off because of COVID, because of a lot of the situation with supply chains and supply and demand. It was just really bottlenecking. A lot of things were happening, and it really drove up inflation. Also, we had stimulus packages, millions, trillions of dollars being put out there. That creates inflation as well. So a lot of factors went into that. Currently, our federal fund rates are 4.25 to 4.5%. They've been coming down steadily from where they had peaked. I think it was right around 8 or 9% where they peaked, and they've been coming down steadily. Unfortunately, over the last month, we're seeing that tick back up a little bit. So we need to keep an eye on that. The Federal Reserve has kind of stepped back in their future anticipation of dropping those rates. They're not being as eager to do that now. They're waiting to see if this settles a little bit or if it continues to tick back up, because they don't want to lower those too quickly. Historically, the high is July 1981. Get this. And this is where I laugh a little bit when some younger people talk about interest rates are just so outrageous. And I'm not saying it's not tough. It's causing a lot of hardship. But in 1981, the federal interest rate was 22.36%. And that was their rate. And then you have banks and all. You had people, upping that. So you're talking, car loans and mortgages. People were paying like 15, 18% on a mortgage. So it was just outrageous. And then you have the historical low of 2011. 0.04. We'd all love to see our inflation rate at 0.04 again, but that's actually not healthy. You need a little bit of inflation to drive the economy. As long as wages are keeping up with that, that can be a good thing. And then right now it's down from 6.5 in 2013. It's at 3.2. But the Great Depression, it was actually to -9% due to deflation. The economy was so bad, it was collapsing, that the interest rate was just plummeting, and that's deflation. They're just trying to stimulate people to buy, use the money. But people, when you have a quarter of the people without work, people didn't have any money to buy anything. So there was just no inflation because there was no demand for anything, because nobody had any money to buy anything. They were just looking to get the bare minimum. And when I say bare minimum, I'm not talking like, oh, I'm just going to get the basic cable package. I'm talking bare minimum, like I need a potato so I can make a potato stew and eat that for 3 days. That's the type of bare minimum they were dealing with. And so the inflation creates the interest rates. And again, that correlation can create, the spending goes down or borrowing goes down, depending, if inflation is really high, people aren't going to be, uh, because interest rates go up, people are not going to be borrowing as much. So they're not spending as much because we're in a very debt oriented society. So if house mortgage rates are up, fewer people are buying. And the reason they're doing that is try to drive prices down to induce more spending, and then interest rates can come down with it. It's just a cycle. Economies do that. We have to be careful that we don't do things that create a mess. Next thing is, and then we'll get into some of the things we need to do to prepare for these, but is just the economic downturns, recessions. The Great Depression, unemployment peaked at 20, we're just going to say 25%. The Great Recession, it was 10%. And in the pandemic, it was 14.7%. And the Great Depression, over 9,000 banks failed. That's how bad the overall economy was. 9,000 banks failed. And if you've done any study on the Great Depression, you understand the panic that took place. If, this isn't just investments in the stock market. Yeah, the stock market plummeted. People lost their investments, and people that didn't have any money needed to pull out from the stock market to get whatever assets they had to pay their bills. But the market was plummeting. And then when people pulled money out, it plummeted further. 9,000 banks failed, and there was no FDIC then. So there was no insurance for people. Say I had, $100,000 in the bank and I went to get that money out, but the bank failed. I could not even get my cash. So people who say, oh, banks are safe. Well, that's why they introduced the FDIC. And just for FYI, there's a bill that's being passed, or an executive order, I apologize, that's removing some of that protection of the banking system for you as a consumer. So that's something I encourage you to do a little research, look into the executive order that has removed the banking protection. It's not removing protections from the bank, it's removing protections from you as a consumer. So that's important for us to know, because we hear all the time people say, well, I want to be safe with my money. I'm just going to put it in the bank. Well, if the bank closes, you have no protection. You can't get your money. And you know me, I'm not a proponent of burying your money in the backyard because it's not keeping up with inflation. So we have to find ways to become involved and help make sure that these safety nets that were put in place to make sure we never fall into that type of Great Depression chaos again never happens. But these safety nets were very important. And a lot of people don't understand why those safety nets were there and what they're used for. And they've been politicized, and those are dangerous to have out of our system. In 2008, the crisis, 465 banks failed. So those who lived through that, and you remember how chaotic that was, imagine 20 times more banks closing than what happened then. And you even get a semblance of what the Great Depression was like. We'd have to almost double what unemployment was. We'd have to have a lot of other factors going on as well. But that was just how chaotic the Great Depression was. Now, 2023, we had a banking crisis where Silicon Valley Bank and some others collapsed due to interest rate hikes. And think about this. This is a bank who has loans out at, let's just say 3%. They've lended the money out at 3%, but now the federal rate has gone up to 6 or 7%. So when they borrow money, the bank borrows money, they're borrowing it at a higher rate than they're getting from the people that they had lent it to. So that's where the chaos and the shutdown came in, because they were overextended. And that's why I talk about not being in debt, not leveraging, not using arbitrage to try to build your wealth, because those types of things can happen to you personally, where you've put out money, but then all of a sudden interest rates go up and banks can recall those loans, and then you're on the hook to have to pay them all back. And if you don't have the cash, then you're going to foreclose, go into bankruptcy, those types of things. That's why it's really important not to just listen to people who say, oh, all you have to do is buy a house and get equity in it, and then buy 10 more houses using equity. And, the Robert Kiyosaki's of the world that are, $1 billion in debt. And all it takes is a crisis like that to happen, and you're wiped out financially. So understand what that means and why that's important before you just buy into this, debt is good, because each crisis has a, different trigger, but preparation. And this is where we're going to get into what we can do to be prepared for all of these types of things: recessions, unemployment, high interest, inflation. All of these things are going to happen. They happen on regular intervals. They happen more frequently than we realize. Just sometimes they get a lot more attention, or they're more impactful than other times, depending on what it is, or if there's a combination of them happening. So we need to control what we can control. You individually can't control inflation. You individually can't control a recession, a bear market. You can't control a market correction, interest rates, any of that. That is out of your control. But what you can control is your finances and your preparation for that. I don't want to lose a job. I don't want people I care for losing a job. But if I lose a job, I'm not going to be up a creek. I'm not going to be fretting and flipping out. Would it put a damper on my plans? Sure, I'd have to alter what my current plans are, perhaps, but it doesn't put me in a place where I'm going to lose sleep. Like, am I going to be able to pay my house? No. Am I going to be without a house next week or next month or 3 months from now? Why? Because I've paid my house off. And a lot of people be like, well, it's not important to pay your house off. The interest rate's so low. Well, if you get into a crisis and you lose a job, you don't have income, guess what? It becomes really handy not to have a house note. So a lot of people have different reasons, and that's fine. You're going to make your personal financial decisions. I made mine based on those types of things. I know life is uncertain, that even the most certain sector of federal employees can be wiped out like that, just instantly, no more income. So, are you prepared? If you lose your job tomorrow, are you prepared to survive a week, a month, a year? Where are you at financially? It's not too late to get started. Now is the time to make proactive steps to prepare yourself for the unknown, and to prepare yourself for the things that we know are going to happen, because they happen on a frequent, regular basis. So, number one, diversify your income streams. Learn to freelance, find a side gig, find something that you're good at and begin to build a side income. And one of the most important things I talk about is passive income. Find sources of passive income where you can have that generating income, your money working for you, whether that be dividends or rental income, whatever the case might be. There's passive income, and those are important to diversify your income stream. And along with that is to diversify your assets. Don't have all your assets in one basket. You don't want all your money in the bank. You don't want all your money in gold. You don't want all your money in bonds. You don't want all your money in stocks. You have to diversify. And even in stocks, we talk about ETFs, exchange traded funds, where you have a basket of stocks. You have one fund. We'll just use my favorite, SCHD. There's 103 stocks in that fund. So I buy one share of SCHD. I'm actually diversified in 100, and I think it's three companies. That is diversification in one sense. That is multiple companies, but you also have to be diversified in different sectors. You can be in something like SOXX, which is all 100% sector of technology. So if technology takes a tank, like in 2008, I'm sorry, in 2001, 2002, the dot-com bubble, everything technology nosedived. Then if you're all in that, you might be diversified in lots of companies, but if they're all tech, you're taking a nosedive. So you want to be in various sectors: technology, healthcare, consumer staples, finances, maybe real estate. So there's lots of different sectors to be included. You got energy, those types of sectors that are helping you to be diversified. Now, if everything goes down because we're in a recession and all, it's still, some may do better. It's very, very seldom that all sectors take a nosedive at the same time. Some may take a bigger dive than others. And that's where that diversification comes in handy. Perhaps you have some money, some of your assets into, obviously stocks, and maybe you have some into real estate. Maybe you have some into a little bit of in bonds or something else. And obviously, having cash is important. And that's where number two is you need to build an emergency fund because of recessions, because of inflation, because of unemployment that can hit any day, anytime. You need to have an emergency fund. And starting out, you want to aim for 3 to 6 months, meaning that if you had zero income coming in, you need 3 to 6 months worth of expenses available, not in stocks where you'd have to sell if the market's down and take a loss. You want that in a high yield savings account, somewhere you can access it. It's there, you can get it, it's earning, a little bit of income, but that's not the goal of it. The goal is as a hedge of protection against you if you lose your income source. So if you get laid off tomorrow, you get one of those emails saying you need to pack your bags. You get an email says you need to tell me the 5 things you did last week or you don't have a job. You get one of those unemployment pink slips that you were not expecting. Do you have 3 to 6 months to help tie you over while you're looking for another job for income? That's the base. That is the minimum you should have. I recommend even more as you've gotten more settled, after you've gotten your debt paid off. And we'll get into that in a minute, but you need to build that up. Once you get your debt paid off, it's good to have a year, maybe if you're getting closer to being financially independent and purposely stopping your income source, you probably want to have 2 to 3 years of income in that type of setting. So if the market is down, we're in a bear market or a deep correction, you're able to ride that out and not have to sell anything. You can live out of that bucket of income in cash while this correction in the stock market comes back. So you're not selling at a loss. So diversify your income streams, diversify your assets, build an emergency fund, and make sure you have cash to survive. If you, your spouse, your partner, you lose income, it's important that you don't have to go in debt to eat. It's important that you don't have to go in debt to keep heat or electricity in your house. It is so important that you have that extra funding, that you don't have to build up debt that you'll have to be digging out of for years to come. And that brings us to the next one: manage debt. You can control what you can control. You're not going to control unemployment necessarily. You're not going to control interest rates, all of that, a recession, but you can control managing your debt. Pay down your high interest debt before interest rise further. If you have anything that's a variable rate, if you have a variable mortgage, oh my gosh, please consult somebody and get into a fixed rate, because the variable mortgage, what happens is once that 5 year period or whatever the beginning period is, oh, I got this nice low rate, then it's variable depending on the market. Imagine if we fell into a 1981 scenario where the federal rate was 22%. Can you imagine all of a sudden you're a little tight right now with your 5-6% mortgage rate? Can you imagine tomorrow waking up and you have a 15% mortgage rate and you have to pay that? Get out of those variable rates. Get out of credit cards, because those can change. What you're paying right now could go up. So get those debts paid down and get out of that debt. And then once you're out of that debt, that's when you can build that emergency fund even further. So when these tragedies, these economic hard times hit, you can control those, because guess what? Interest rates go up, doesn't bother me because I don't need to borrow money. See, a lot of people panicked. I actually, and I don't mean this negative, I don't want high interest. I want inflation out of control. But when interest rates go up, that for me as a saver, as an investor, plays for me in my benefit, because I don't have to go to the bank and say, hey, I'd like a car. So I need to borrow $25,000 and pay whatever interest they're having. I go to my bank and I take my money out and I pay that. So being out of debt and building those funds is putting you in control in these type of economical situations. Meanwhile, my $25,000 that I'm saving for a car is sitting there and as interest rates are going up, I'm earning more. So I'm keeping pace with inflation. And so for savers, interest rates are actually a good thing. I remember in the 1980s when I got a CD, it was just a 6-month CD. I put $1,000 in it. I was like 19 years old, put $1,000 in it for 6 months and I made $100. That was a 10% CD. I put it in the bank, absolutely no risk. 6 months later, my $1,000 was now $1,100 because interest rates were so high. So interest rates are great for savers, horrible for borrowers. So if you're in debt and continue to have to be in debt when you have to go buy something and you need to borrow money, interest rates hurt you. And that is what they're intended to do, to slow the economy down, to let the supply chain catch up. Once they do, they kick in. But what can happen is we can go into a recession where people are like, now I don't have any money. So they're trying to lower stuff to entice people to buy. And those are that up and down that we go with. So I encourage you to pay off your debt. I have a good friend who was battling just recently, hearing different advice. A lot of people in his circle saying, don't pay your house off. He had the money sitting in the bank. He has everything else paid off. And we're going to actually do a interview with him. He'll be on the channel at some point. But he had everything paid off but his house. And he had been putting the extra money toward his house, but he was putting in the bank. And he came to the place where he realized, I have enough money to just go pay this thing off and be debt free, completely debt free. And he was battling that because he was always hearing, it's not wise to pay off your house because you lose your tax benefit. You lose, all the benefits of having a debt and the low interest. You could put that money in investments and make, 4, 5, 6% more on investments. I shared with him my opinion. We talked through things. He felt confident about it. He talked to a financial advisor who agreed with it, and he went and paid his house off. Him and his wife at a young age are totally debt free. And guess what? They're doing fine, and they're able to they're now focusing on maxing out their 401ks, maxing out, an IRA. They're looking at maxing out investments now at a young age and driving their net worth and their wealth, and that compounding is going to take off because they have so much more cash available to invest. But more importantly, this type of economic chaos and uncertainty isn't going to cause them as much stress as it would have if they still had 2 car notes and they still had credit card debts, they still had student loan debts, and they still had a mortgage. They're in a much better place now where and I hope nothing happens to this sweet family, but if something happens to them and they lose their income, replacing the necessary budget they have month to month is so much easier. They don't have to make 100,000, 200,000, whatever their income is. They don't have to make as much because if they just need to be able to pay their bills, that demand, that need is so much less now. So that is one reason it hedges against this type of economic chaos that we're living in. The last thing, control what you can control, is invest wisely. Consider assets that historically outpace inflation, such as index funds and real estate. Again, I'm not talking about going and investing. If you're in debt, I really think, other than getting your company match, you should be pouring all your money into your debt. Get that debt paid off, get that out of your life. Then you can focus on these investments. But once you do, index funds are so easy, or ETFs, whatever you prefer. They're so easy. They manage themselves. They're low cost and long term. If you're in a good one, I'm not saying just go buy any index funds. You have to do some research. But once you pick a good index fund, an S&P 500 index fund or total market index fund, you invest in that and you just keep consistently dollar cost averaging in that, you will see your wealth accumulate so rapidly and so well over time. The first couple years, you won't see much. 10 years, you'll start seeing a little bit. But if you're a long-term investor, 15, 20, 30 years, you start seeing that thing blasting off. And when you don't have debt and you can pour money into it, but more importantly, all that aside, building wealth is great. We have a goal to build wealth, to build financial independence. All that aside, in uncertain financial times, in economic chaos, in world news that is just the world is coming to an end. There's people talking, about World War III. Heard someone very important person just today talking to another very important world leader asking, could they beat Russia by themselves? There's talks of things that are causing anxiety and stress, and economically people are scared. When you get your personal finances under control, that is one thing you can control to help alleviate some of that stress, and stress is the number one killer of people in our society. So control what you can. Markets are going to drop, economies are going to fluctuate, interest rates are going to go up and down, inflation is going to be there. Those things are out of your control. But the list that we provided, the things that we talked about, diversify your income streams, build an emergency fund, diversify your investments, manage your debt, and invest wisely. And you can navigate through these uncertain times and the uncertain times that will come in the future, because again, they happen on a regular basis. That's it for today. Thank you for joining me on Simply Money. If you like this video, hit that like and subscribe button. Go ahead and share it with somebody who you think maybe could benefit from this, and be encouraged that even though times are uncertain, there is a way to help control some of that. And I appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you next time on Simply Money.